Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and in this video I am happy to bring you the 2021 Fish Room Tour Part 1. We're going to break this up into two parts. In this part, we're going to be looking at the tanks behind me. Next time we'll be looking at the tanks on the other side of the fish room. We've gotten some cool fish over the last year. We've lost a few. I hope you enjoy the video. I appreciate you being here. Welcome to the 2021 Fish Room Tour Part 1. It's hard to believe, but it has been an entire year since we took a closer look at all the tanks that we have in the fish room. This is part 1. We're going to be looking at this side. In the part 2 that I released next week, we will take a look at the other side of the fish room. But I'm really excited to bring you what we've got going on here. We've gotten some new fish since the last time you saw it, and I think they're going to be pretty awesome. So I figured let's go ahead and start with the low boy and the 20-gallon tanks right below it. That might be a good place to start. So here is our multi-low boy tank. These are Neolamprologus multifasciatus, otherwise known as the Midas Cichlid. This is a 50-gallon low boy. It's made by Zoomed. It's 4 feet long, 2 feet wide, but only 10 inches tall, and it is the perfect tank for these fish. And we have hundreds of them in this tank. They breed fairly easily. We've done species profiles on them before, by the way. I will put species profiles in the description below for a lot of the fish that you see here today in case you're interested in breeding them or keeping them or just want more information. But this is a great tank. It is one of my favorite tanks in all the fish room on either side to watch, just because there's always so much activity. The filtration consists of 2 sponge filters, and we have a Penplex internal canister filter just to kind of take all the particulate matter that these guys dig up, try to keep that from accumulating in the water. This is actually one of the few tanks that we have left that have pool filter sand, and it is illuminated by one 4-foot Phoenix Stingray light. This is one of the 20 gallons right below the 50-gallon low boy. In the fish room, we call it the brown tank. This is something that Joanna scaped in 2020. And there are some really cool fish in here. These are the tiger Limia that you're going to be seeing here very shortly, as well as we have a couple of L10A lizard tail plecos that I really like, and even some Hasbrosus cories, and we have some blue mystery snails and a couple ivory mystery snails in this tank as well. But this is a wonderful tank for us. You can see all the tiger Limia are really starting to breed, which is cool. I love these fish. They're live bearers, and so if you're looking for something a little bit different, maybe you've had guppies and you've had endlers and you want a different type of live bear, this might be a really good fish to consider. A little bit of top cover, as you're going to see here in a moment, with some hornwort, and you can get a lot of fry survival. This tank is filtered by just one sponge filter. We have a Phoenix Stingray on here that actually is shared with the tank next to it. It's a 4-foot Phoenix that can actually cover 2 of the 20-gallon tanks side by side, but absolutely love this tank. The sand in this tank is actually Carib Sea sand. It's got more of a brown color to it. All the rocks, I believe we got from a landscaping place, which saves a lot of money, and it's primarily planted with hornwort, anubias, and a little bit of jungle val. This 20-gallon is right next to the one you just saw. These are Neolamprologus caudopunctatus, otherwise known as the caudopunk. This is a lake Tanganyika fish that I absolutely love. This tank is very ugly because it's designed just to be a grow-out tank, a breeding and grow-out tank for these fish. And normally we wouldn't have so many in this tank, but with everything the way it was this past year, we didn't move as many fish as we normally do, but these are fantastic fish. They're not technically shell dwellers, but they stay around the same size, and sometimes the fry will utilize the shells when they are being moved from one part of the tank to the next. And here we've got our rack of 20 longs. Let's take a closer look at what we've got in these tanks. First one, we've got Neolamprologus similis. It is another shell dweller. It looks very similar to the multis that I showed you in the low boy. I've actually compared these two fish before. I'll put that video in the upper right hand corner. I really love these shell dwellers. They are some of my all-time favorites. The coloration is almost kind of like the opposite of the multis that we saw earlier. And we've gotten some really good breeding out of this group, even just being in a 20 long. So this is definitely an option for a smaller tank. They have all kinds of personality, just like the multis do, and they show off and they flare, but they very rarely do any damage to one another. They don't prey on one another's fry, which is pretty cool. Here we've just got them on some black sand. This is one of the few Lake Tanganyikans that I actually think looks better on black sand. Just one sponge filter is basically running the tank, and we can see here lots of shells, a few rocks, and some sand is pretty much all you need for most shell dwellers. What's really interesting about this tank, and not something I try to do on purpose, is there's actually a couple very large mystery snails that live with these guys, and they have been unharmed since the very first time they accidentally made their way into the tank. And we've also got a Bristlenose Pleco that kind of keeps the glass clean, but this is not a combination I would recommend with the mystery snails and the shell dwellers. That just happened to be something that's worked out. We'll probably remove those mystery snails relatively soon. This is the 20 long right next to the tank you just saw. It really is just a tank that's set up to breed our super red Bristlenose Plecos. And interestingly enough, I did not think there were any Neocaridina shrimp left in this tank. I thought they had all died back about a year ago, and then as I cleared more of this tank out, I looked at it and realized, wow, we've got a lot of shrimp in here and some really nice cherry shrimp. Also some pumpkins and a few yellow shrimp. So it's kind of an interesting tank where we're getting breeding from both the Plecos and the shrimp, but it's not really set up to be beautiful. It's just set up to breed these fish, and I guess now the shrimp as well. This 20 long is right above the one you just saw, Julidochromis ornatus. These are going to get the award for being the most shy fish we have in the fish room. I actually had to go back to last year's fish room tour and let you at least see what these guys look like, because they just do not come out. Even when I feed the tank, they still hide unless I walk away. Every once in a while you just get fish that are like that. They're beautiful fish. They've bred for us a little bit, which is why I like that algae on the rocks that you saw earlier. It just helps with fry survival. And the last of the 20 longs we're going to take a look at is just real briefly this mystery snail breeding tank. Joanna also likes to put some of her plants in here if they need to be cleaned off. And so this is kind of what this tank really is all about. We've got some really cool fish in these 40-gallon breeders that I'm excited to show you, some of which you have not seen, and possibly a tank or two that you haven't seen the updates. This is another multi-tank, same fish that we have in the 50-gallon lowboy, but one of the things I wanted to do was make sure we had these fish in more than one tank, just in case something ever happened to the multi-tank, there was a disease outbreak or something happens, we had a backup. And these guys have been breeding really, really well in this 40-gallon breeder. The background is from Universal Rocks. It's a 3D background that we purchased in 2020. I like the way it looks. I think it adds something pretty cool to the dynamic of the tank, but absolutely love the way that this tank is breeding for. The fish in this tank are breeding for us, and it's just a really fun tank to look at. This is our Cyprichromis leptosoma 40-gallon breeder. I really love this tank. These are Lake Tanganyikan fish that tend to go pretty well with shell dwellers if you've got a tall enough tank. We have them here mixed with some Neolamprologus brevis. That's a shell dweller that you're going to see as we take a closer look at this tank. We don't get a lot of fry survival from the shell dwellers. I think maybe the Cyprichromis might be eating them, but the Cyprichromis obviously are breeding quite well in this setup. Their fry are, as you're going to see, fairly large, and they're usually large enough so that they cannot be eaten by other fish like the shell dwellers. But you can see the males have this great color with the yellow fins and the blue bodies. The females don't have quite as much color, but if you look closely, you're going to see a lot of the females in this tank. Almost all of them are holding fry or holding eggs. This big giant crypt that we have in the middle started out as a very small plant, and it just really took off, and it's really just filled up the whole tank, and I just love that particular plant. This is yet another one of these tanks. It's one of the few remaining tanks that we have in the fish room that has pool filter sand. This particular tank is run by a Beamswork light, so it's not a Phoenix Stingray, but it's a Beamswork. And this is one of the few tanks that we actually keep heaters in the tank as well, just in case something ever happens to the temperature. This 40 is right above it. This is also a Cyprichromis, but this is a Tricolor, and it is a jumbo Cyprichromis, so these are going to get a little bit larger. They're on the smaller side right now, and they're not showing their color just yet, but when they do, they're going to look awesome. They're going to have blue in their body, and unlike the Cyprichromis that we just saw, not only does their tail fin turn yellow, but their faces turn yellow as well. Again, Lake Tanganyika fish. Again, the 3D background is from Universal Rocks. The hornwort that we have up here is really just to provide a little bit of greenery to the tank, even though it's not biotope specific. It's just something I like along with the wood. I think it gives it a softer feel, which is something I enjoy. But these fish are going to take a little while to grow up. You always need a little bit of patience with a lot of the Lake Tanganyikans, but when these fish color up, I think they're going to look really awesome. I'm looking forward to hopefully them breeding at some point in the near future. This is a 40-gallon breeder that really its job is to breed Blue Dream Neocaridina shrimp. I love these shrimp. I think this might be my favorite color, and this setup has worked very well for us. There's a little bit of jungle val. You see there's a lot of hornwort floating at the top, and we've pulled a lot of Blue Dream shrimp out of this tank and brought them to swaps and auctions, and we just absolutely love these. We've actually kind of spread them around to other tanks within the fish room and some of the tanks on Joanna's nanowall, just to make sure that we have a backup. Again, I would hate to have something happen to this tank and then lose all the Blue Dreams, and so we've got them in a few tanks throughout the fish room. This is a tank we recently redid. It was housing our Pseudotropheus saulosi. It basically just had some sand and a few pieces of flagstone. Joanna went ahead and redid this. Again, another Universal Rocks 3D background. We've got a few angelfish in here. You can see the Rasbora hets. There is a really cool blue phantom pleco in this tank as well. She planted it with Anubias. We've got some jungle val, some corkscrew val in here as well. And I really like how this tank has turned out. It's a little bit cloudy still, just because it was recently redone. But I'm looking forward to seeing how these plants grow up. We may have to remove an angelfish or two. We'll see. We've got mechanisms to do that just in case that doesn't work. But it's definitely a tank that I'm enjoying, certainly now that we've got it updated. The one right above it, this is just a Bristlenose breeding tank. Not a whole lot going on here, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's a productive tank for us. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at both of our 75-gallon tanks. These are both cichlid tanks. The first one, the one on top, is our 75-gallon Mbuna tank. We get questions about this tank all the time. Mbuna, as you know, get a bad rap for being an aggressive type of fish, but we have been able to manage that aggression. As you can see, not a lot of fin nipping or fish hiding in a corner or fish that are being outright bullied. And one of the ways that we do that, you'll see some very small yellow labs in this tank. And I have found when you want to add cichlids to an existing adult tank, if you add them on the smaller side, so the trick is they have to be large enough not to be eaten, but small enough where they're mostly ignored. And then over time, as these fish get into their natural pecking order within the tank, this tends to work out fairly well. And of course, with the Mbuna, it's all about the color. Now, it's not only just Mbuna in this tank. You're going to see we've got a dragon blood in here. We've got the dolphin cichlids in here, and we've actually got a couple Lake Victorian species 35s in here as well, just because it winds up being a good mix. And so that's kind of what we've done, is we've tried to keep fish together that are not going to be overly aggressive with one another. And so far, this tank has been up and running for a number of years. We've been fairly successful in doing that. The filtration on this tank consists of a couple sponge filters and a hang-on back filter. We have a Marineland Pro 375 on this tank, just to try to take care of all the stuff that these fish like to dig up and dig through. This is kind of a hodgepodge of a tank. It is a 75-gallon peacock tank for the most part. We have some OBs in here that were a mix of Red Empress and Dragon Bloods. Here we have an American cichlid. This is a Midas Cichlid. Her name is Ruby. She gave us a lot of fry. We lost the male. We needed a place to put her. Figured it would work out okay in here, and it has, and it has for quite some time. She's not overly aggressive, and this was a well-established tank, so everybody for the most part gets along fine. As you can see, not a whole lot of issues. There's one of the star sapphires that we moved over from the 40 gallons from last year's fish room tour, so we moved them into here. We've got some Eureka Reds in here and various females. So let's take a look at these 220s on this side. Another tank where we have some Neolamprologus, caudopunctatus. So one of the things that we tried to do this year is when we had fish that we really enjoyed, we wanted to move them to other tanks to make sure that we had more than one colony. So these guys have been breeding in here. The fry are a little bit smaller than what we saw in the other tank. We've got mystery snails in here for some reason that are surviving. This is a grow out tank for some Pseudotropheus saulosi. You're going to see the parents in part 2, and the parents are absolutely awesome looking fish. So you can see here, some of the males are starting to get those darker bands. That's usually how you can tell at about this age. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the two 125s that we've got going on here. The top 125 has the electric blue Acara that we moved over from the 40 gallon about a year ago or so, and they've been working out really well here. But since that time, we've gotten some other fish that I'm really excited about that we've been growing out since they were probably less than an inch, and that is the Vieja synspilum that you're going to see. This is another one that we picked up, the Australoheros. We actually got this and the female. They were really beat up at a bag swap, and you can still see there's some tears in the fins, and they did not look all that great when we first got them, but they've healed up pretty well. They're relatively peaceful fish. Here's the Vieja synspilum that we're super excited about. We have 10 of them along with these 5 electric blue Acara. This combination is probably not going to work long term, but we have another 125 set aside for these beautiful electric blue Acara should that combination not work, or if we have to kind of thin out the stocking levels on this tank, which I suspect we will, because right now we have 10 of these Vieja in this tank along with the 5 electric blue Acara, and in a 125 I don't think that many fish is going to work in this volume of tank water. So the synspilum are going to be amazing fish. They're just now starting to show their color, but wait until they get a little bit larger. They're small. They're only about maybe 3.5 to 4 inches. They can get quite a bit larger. Here's a remaining Iliodon wide-eye. This is actually a goodiad. This is the bottom 125. If you've been following the channel for any length of time, you'll notice that one fish is missing. One of our favorite fish in the fish room, Timmy, our Nile tilapia, passed about a month or 2 ago, and so that was a rough one. This tank right now still has Chaz, who is our Oscar. This tank was originally set up for him, and then all of these African cichlids kind of came in after. Not really something that we planned to do. It just sort of happened, and they've been getting along just fine for years. But this really is his tank. We've got a mix of cichlids in here, from Dragon Bloods to OBs to Red Empress, and it was really all the OBs you see in here were a mix of the Dragon Bloods and Red Empress, just like we saw in the 75. But this is his tank. It does need a rescape, and it's something that we're going to be looking at. Filtration, we've got 3 sponge filters in here. We have a Marineland Emperor Pro 450 hang-on back filter, as well as a Marineland internal canister filter, just trying to keep things in check in terms of water parameters and water clarity. We just did a water change on this tank, so there's some stuff in the water column. But this is absolutely one of my favorite fish in the fish room. He's got a ton of personality. These are the last couple tanks that I wanted to show you. The top one is a 23-gallon bow front. We've got 2 really cool things in there. One are the pumpkin shrimp that you can see kind of walking around, and the other one are these green dragon long fin plecos. They're bristlenose plecos. They are some very slow growing plecos, but also really cool. And I like the white tips on the longer fins, which is pretty interesting. So we've got about 6 or 8 of them in this tank, along with the pumpkin shrimp. You can see one here resting on one of these giant crypts that are in the tank, but it's a really cool combination. It's a fun tank to watch. this is a 37-gallon that we have set aside for breeding Neolamprologus brichardi. It's a Lake Tanganyika tank, and it's been a productive tank for us. It's not a beautiful tank. It's going to get redone, and I think we'll probably be moving out this colony and selling these off at the swaps and auctions, and then moving on to something different. I've got some other ideas that I want to do for this tank, clean it up a lot, and start a different breeding project. These are great fish. They're really pretty, but they are very prolific breeders. And so if you get a group of them in just about any size tank, you could potentially have a lot of fish. Here's just a row of 10-gallon tanks that we have. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because even in that second one there's nothing in there. These tanks for the most part are set aside just for grow out. Except for the top one, we've got some really cool magenta mystery snails in this tank, and it's another plant holding tank for Joanna when she's doing scapes. So she usually likes to throw her plants in the snail tanks. They kind of clean them off and then they're ready to go the next time around. So this was part 1 of the 2021 fish room tour. I hope you enjoyed it. We will have part 2 out very, very soon, and I look forward to seeing you there. If you enjoyed this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.